Okay, off mute. Okay. Good evening, everyone. It is about 7:03, and we're going to call tonight's Board of Education meeting to order. We have three of us here in person, myself, Colin Hostin, Godfrey Azima, Diana Carpio, and we have two board members attending virtually, Suzanne Kurashetz and Erica De Palma. We will start with our Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, and my thanks to Zadian Morales, Fiona Nivros, and Ryan Penta at Tracy in grade 2, second grade at Tracy Magnet School. I do want to start this meeting with a moment of silence and remembrance for our colleague and friend, Mike Barbas. And I just want to, we all know Mike, but we know that he is a long-serving member of the Board of Education here in Norwalk. He was a passionate and knowledgeable advocate for our schools and students. He served as both the chair and vice chair of the Board of Education, as well as chair of the Finance Committee, negotiations of personnel and facilities, and was instrumental in developing a new construction and renovation plan for our school district. So tonight, I'd like us all to please engage in a moment of silence for the passing of Mike Barbas. Thank you. All of our hearts go out to Mike's family and friends, and I know that many of us are still very much in shock over last week's news. For tonight's spotlight, I'd like to introduce the Board Secretary, Godfrey Azima.
This evening, Columbus Magnet School student Sky Martin named a National Invention Convention winner. The Norwalk Board of Ed is proud to recognize Columbus Magnet School student Sky Martin for having placed first out of all fourth graders competing nationally in the annual Invention Convention this past summer. Sky invented the pump and twist shampoo bottle to solve an issue that many face daily, trying to get all the product out of the bottom of the shampoo bottle that the pump can't reach. Sky's first pump and twist prototype was made from a shampoo bottle, the bottom of a hand cream jar, hot glue, and rubber bands. She worked diligently on multiple prototypes to solve for issues and perfect her product. The pump and twist won the school-wide and statewide Invention Convention competitions in the spring and the National Invention Convention Awards in June. Sky moved on to the global convention, featuring 120 inventions from students in the United States, China, Mexico, and Singapore. With each new level of competition, Sky updated her instructional video and added new details and elements. As part of the district's commitment to increase rigor in academic programs, our schools participate in regional and national competitions, providing our students will the opportunity to apply problem-solving skills to real-world issues. The Invention Convention encourages students to identify a need or work to solve a problem by following the same steps and patent application procedures that an inventor would follow in patenting an invention. The Board of Ed honors Sky this evening and our gifted and talented teacher, Miss Alyssa Malinowski, who supported and encouraged her students to think big, providing them with the framework to transform their ideas into reality. Sky, we wish you luck in the future, inventing, and look forward to seeing you with ideas you choose to pursue next. At this moment, Sky, please, I'd like to invite you up just for us to acknowledge your greatness in person.
Did I go on?
Yes.
Nice job.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And Sky, this is for you. I just read it out loud. It says, Certificate of Excellence is hereby awarded to Sky Martin for being named a 2021 National Invention Convention winner, signed by myself, Board Chair, and Dr. Estrella, School Superintendent. Congratulations. Well done.
Thank you.
Ethnicity is here as well, of course. Now I'd like to invite any members of the public, either in person or on Zoom, who wish to make a public comment to do so. Oh, yes, thank you.
I think I was first. First and perhaps only on that one. It's so interesting to be back in this room, and I haven't been in here since before COVID, so fairly nostalgic. And Lisa, 19 Shorefront Park. I want to thank all of you who reached out to me privately, extending your condolences regarding Mike's sudden passing last week and wanting to help. I lost a good friend. We all did. But whether friend or foe, I think it's safe to say we're all in a state of shock over the sudden death of a man who seemed to have a boundless amount of energy, gave 150% of his time to Norwalk, and was taken way too soon. I don't want to belabor his missteps of the past. Mike was no saint, but I'm here to make a formal request that you honor Mike's memory and his 10 years of Board of Ed service to the students of Norwalk Public Schools. And prior to that, nearly a decade as a fundraiser for the Carver Center. And finally, his state-level advocacy support for the group CONCAN. My own education efforts with Mike date back to 2009 and our time on the PTO. As all of you know, public service is not an easy path, and boards of education have it particularly tough, especially now. Mike's mistakes are put on full display over the past few years. But what's that passage in the Bible? He who is without sin? His passionate advocacy for students over adults, families over a bureaucratic educational system, and his wealth of institutional knowledge that he shared with everyone, combined with his countless hours of private assistance to nearly each and every board member that served with him today and yesterday. It needs to be acknowledged. So tonight, I'm formally asking the board to consider recognizing this man in his school construction efforts by naming the Roe School gym after him and host some sort of public memorial in his honor. He fought for the students of Norwalk right up until the end. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Lisa. Mary.
Mary Jordan, President of the Norwalk Federation of Teachers, 9 Mott Avenue. On behalf of the executive board and of the teachers of Norwalk, we would like to extend our sincere condolences and our deepest sympathy on the passing of your colleague, board member, Mr. Barnes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Are there anybody on Zoom who is here to make a comment?
No one's raising their hand.
Okay. We did receive a few comments via email that I will read in part right now. First comment is from Juliana Solis, who writes, I was the one that made the petition to change the school start times back to 7:30 a.m. for the students. I'm a senior at Norwalk High School. I've experienced both the 7:30 start time and the 8:30 a.m. start time. And I can tell you that the 7:30 start time was so much better. All 1,200 people that signed my petition for this change wanted this and wanted to stay this way. Students are who matter in this. Students wanted this change. So students made it happen. I hope you are remembering everything that students said during the September 18th meeting. I said in my speech that I didn't believe you listened to the students who were speaking out against the 8:30 start time, because a lot of the issues they were speaking upon were issues you made to change the times back to 7:30. I honestly just wanted to thank you for listening to the students and making this change for them. Thank you, Juliana. The second comment is from Sarah Kraft, who writes, Officer Cornell is the best. We appreciate his hard work and love seeing him at Rowayton Elementary School. We wish he was not spread so thin among 3 to 4 schools and could spend more time on our campus. The children love him. Thanks so much from the Crafts. Thank you, Sarah. The third comment is from Shelley Lindstrom, who writes, for the record, what are the data sources for all the published information regarding NPS? I have been doing some research, and every time I find numbers for one thing, it does not match another. These numbers should match. In this day and age, there should be an aggregate website that everyone can access. On another note, why are there more English language learners in high school than middle school? For the last 2 years, there seems to be an additional 200 ELL kids in high school, but if they were in ELL in middle school and more successful, that would mean even more than 200 kids are coming in without English. Is this true? Where is the information that demonstrates the success? Lastly, where can the grade or course specific numbers be found for performance? It is not on the EdSide webpage. Thank you. And thank you, Shelley. Next, we have a comment from Robert Pasquarelli Jr., who writes, Dear board members, I have a proposal for you to please consider in tonight's meeting and in the coming week. Please consider this proposal to make sure we have an accurate idea of what the NPS families and students want. In order to make sure that all constituents are being heard about the rollback of the school start times and to make sure that we have the students' mental and physical health in our best interests, I would like another survey to be sent out. The reason I'm asking is because rumor has it the last survey was inaccurate due to the fact that you were able to fill out the survey multiple times instead of just once for each email address. I myself filled it out twice, and my daughter is hearing it from her high school classmates bragging they voted at least 17 times to get their vote in the vote in their favor. If you could, please send out a second survey asking one simple question: if there are for or against the reversion of school start times to all NPS families and students, to make sure everyone is properly heard before the October 5th deadline. Thank you, Robert. And finally, we have a comment from Christy Hughes on 76 Main Street. As a parent of a high school and middle school student, I must say I'm against the changing of start times beginning October 5th. Scientific studies show this is not the healthiest for our children. If we have learned nothing else this past 1.5 years, it should be that we should listen to science. I feel as if my children's well-being is being sacrificed for sports teams. I watched the Board of Ed meeting via Zoom. Had I known this scenario was even open for discussion, I would have signed up to speak at the meeting. I feel it's very unfair that the solution was not even presented to us as parents before the meeting. My son is a high school student, was at school that day, and was not given any survey to take his opinion on new school times. How many students took the survey? Certainly not all students in school that day. Thank you in advance for hearing my concerns. And thank you, Christy. And thank you to everyone who commented and sent their comments in. We do appreciate all the participation from our community. I do want to advise everyone that we will continue to be inviting members of the public to join us either in person or virtually for our Board of Ed meetings, and to take part in public comment. You may also continue to email your comments in. All emailed comments will be added to the public record, but to have the comments read or heard at the meeting, we invite you to attend either in person or via Zoom. If there are no more public comments, I'm going to take us, and I forgot to introduce the other person on the dais with us, our Superintendent, Dr. Estrella, for the Superintendent's report.
Thank you, Chair. So there's a number of items that we have on the agenda today as part of the Superintendent report. I'm going to ask Ms. Sandra Fayois to come up for the first item, which is around the school research officer assignment. I know that the community has expressed some concerns in terms of the SRO reduction, and I thought it would be important for us to clarify the current state of affairs and provide some facts in terms of where we are and the work that we're doing in collaboration with the Norwalk Police Department, who have been incredibly supportive of school opening and provided, with the limited staff that they have, additional resources, particularly to address some of the congestion problems that we've had over the past few weeks. But I'll turn it over to Ms. Fayois to speak to where we are with that work.
Thank you, Dr. Estrella, and good evening, board members. And I am also joined by Deputy Chief James Walsh, who is here with me. We will wait around for your questions. I do have a few slides for you to keep us on task. And I agree with the comment. This is Cornella Buzzini, and Officer Buzzini is the best. And that is him next to my son. So everybody loves our SROs. And it actually, the BMD as an NPD relationship has been longstanding. We started our official partnership in 2015, and the partnership has spanned many different facets. Everything from the officers coming into the schools to teach there, to our SRO program, to us collaborating on issues like traffic issues that we have this school year. And then we just wanted to remind and educate the public on a few things. One is that the SROs are actually covered by the MPD, and we benefit from that service. And that prior to COVID, there were typically 8 SROs, and currently there are 3. And these have been assigned with a commitment by the MPD to review again once resources change, and that's been an ongoing conversation. This is just a map that illustrates the SROs that are assigned and to the regions that they are assigned at our schools. All schools receive this communication and have readily been accessing their SRO. And some things that we have done is because the SRO, we have few SROs, but we have definitely upped the ante in other areas of our partnership. One is that along with Deputy Chief Walsh and Sergeant Orr, we decided to actually increase the 3-day lot officers' hours to help us and manage traffic related concerns and provide the schools additional supports. They also have been instrumental, like we said, in alleviating the traffic issues and the transportation concerns that we've seen this year. There's frequent communication between myself, the Deputy Chief, Sergeant Orr, and the chief himself. And there's also a lot of collaboration between the JRB and the school leaders, myself including. This is the Juvenile Review Board. We serve on many boards together. And then there was a training for school principals on minimal facts and interview approaches and other topics to help just guide us to make sure that we're collecting the appropriate data when events do occur at the school. So this is where we're at. This is the update that we have right now, and we're open to your questions if there are any regarding the SRO program or any aspects of the partnership. And I invite you to listen.
Any questions? Good evening, Dr. Chill. Just to reaffirm Chief Mahoney's message, early message, all police departments are completely committed to rebuilding its SRO program to what it was prior to our manpower issues. We were up to 8 or 9 prior to COVID, but due to staffing issues, workers' comp, we're down to 3 dedicated SROs, but they are supplemented, as Mrs. Feo said, by 3 additional. So there's 6 officers out there today, and they're all myself, Sergeant Orr, in cooperation with Mr. Rios, we strategically designated them geographically. So the officers could easily commute to the neighboring schools, not only the SROs, but the officers that are there on the extra. So there are 6 officers today, Monday through Friday, dedicated to the schools.
I guess we'll open it for questions to the board.
Yeah, and are there any questions from my fellow board members?
In terms of timing to backfill the other 2, do we have a sense of what that timeline looks like?
Timeline, right now we're actively recruiting and we're currently testing. But usually with the Police Academy of 27 weeks and the FTO program of another 12, it takes us approximately 40 weeks to get an officer trained in solo so that you can now be a viable unit if you take a spot. It takes almost a full year, but we're doing everything, and the SRO program is not the only unit in the North Police Department to suffer cuts back to patrol. We have decreased the traffic unit and special services and other divisions to supplement the patrol for staffing issues. So the SRO, they've been, we've tried to save as many people in the SRO as we can, but we needed officers for patrol.
Has there been any thought about planning for orienting the next identified SRO when that happens? You know, being mindful of how the prior SROs, I imagine it must have been themselves in their time on the force that definitely made them an asset to the school.
Yeah, in the spring of 2021, we went through an interview process of all officers who were interested in becoming SROs. We selected 5 officers to be SROs, and they've all gone through the NASRO training. So they're already certified and ready to go.
And for the public, could you articulate the NASRO training?
It's the National Association of School Resource Officers that explains the triad of duties an SRO has, just not law enforcement, but just community policing and outreach within the schools, and all the resources that the officers can apply within the schools. All those officers did get trained and certified this past summer and spring. So they are ready to go when the Empower does allow it.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for this update. And I want to also reiterate Dr. Estrella's appreciation for our partnership with NPD. I think it's been extremely beneficial. You know, I'm curious just to hear your sort of very general opinion, but you know, we've heard mixed feedback on this opening of schools so far. I know that some people hear that, you know, we're down a couple of SROs and they may get a little nervous. We also hear from many families who really appreciate their SROs, including Officer Cornell. Has there been anything worrying about the start of the school term?
No, we dealt with the traffic issues. We managed the traffic units with the traffic issues within community policing, our SROs, actually just taking officers from patrol on the second platoon day shift and redeployment to assist at Strawberry Hill and Highland Avenue and Scrivener Avenue. So we used all our assets available when it's sort of like adjusted slowly, but we were there and we made it work for what we had. Other than that, no.
Great, thank you so much.
I think tied to this conversation, because one of the things that we've heard is concerns in terms of incident in the schools and how some people have the perception that they've increased relative to prior years. And I had the team pull data for the month of September in comparison to 2019-20, which was the year that kids were in person, similar to this year. And actually, we had a reduction in incidents. The prior year, we had 71 incidents between August 1st and September 27, because we tried to keep it in the same range as where we are at this point. For this current year, 21-22, we have 46 incidents overall throughout the district. So there's been a significant reduction. If we look at the high schools, which is I think where most of the conversations came out of, Brian McMahon had 18 incidents in 2018 to 2020. This year they've had 17. Norwalk High School basically have reduced the incident by half. 2019, 2020, there were 25. This year there are 12. And I just want to provide that context because I think that as a result of social media, some things have been advertised and it's created this perspective that there's more incidents and it has something to do with COVID. When in reality, the total count as of this point has been quite significantly less than prior years. Obviously, our goal is to have no incidents happening in our schools, but I think it's important to have context in relative to prior experiences, because I think there was this assumption that as a result of kids coming back from COVID, that incidents in the district had risen, and that's not factual. So I think it's important to kind of reiterate that and point that out for clarity across the system.
And Dr. Estrella, the incidents you're referring to are incidents that required remediation.
These are incidents that include expulsion, in-school suspension, out-of-school suspensions.
Okay.
Can I add something?
Go ahead, Sarah.
Dr. Estrella, I'm really glad that you provided that data context. I think that's always really important to do. And I wanted to say that I was listening to a conversation about another school district where there had been a perception of increased, disciplinary incidents or increased fighting. And the perspective that was offered there was that the adults are nervous about this transition that we're all going through together. Everyone is feeling fear about not knowing what to expect as far as coming back to school. And so I think that might explain people focusing more on the negative things and maybe wanting to talk about them more.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that needs to be put on the table, like we have increased the number of providers providing social services for our students, which I think is really important. And we place an emphasis in making sure that the social emotional component of the school day is embedded and addressed on a day-to-day basis, either through advisory or one-on-one guidance or school counseling support or social services. And it's something that if we had the resources, we would continue to increase, and it's something that we're constantly looking at. One of the things that we are in the process of planning is creating a task force where we can have more in-depth conversations around school safety and ways in which we can improve practices that embed behavior interventions, and look at other ways of supporting students, not really in the context of punitive behavior management, but really thinking through what are the root causes of some of the behaviors being exhibited and how can we effectively support students. So we will provide additional information throughout the course of the year in how we can engage in this conversation. But we have been speaking to some of our union leaders in terms of what that could look like, and also with other constituents within the system, so that we can design a task force that will be really meaningful in improving our practices district-wide.
Great.
I just had one other comment, and I agree. Thank you for the data. It always it's good to have the correct perspective on these pieces. But I want to, and I'm also happy to see not that there's not 3 SROs, but 6. But I am also anxious to see us get back to the level we were before, or even higher. I have to say I was blessed at Brian McMahon. I worked with several outstanding school resource officers, and they were really valuable members of our faculty and our senator team, that it really helped us with that idea of, showing policemen and police women in a different light, and understanding that they're friends and they're people that students could go to. And anytime you can kind of build that support by having them in the building on a frequent basis and a daily basis, the better chance there is for those strong relationships to form. And so I encourage everything to be done to get us back at least the level we were before, if not higher.
Thank you, Suzanne. Okay. Yeah, I think, again, I think that's the questions from the board, and I really appreciate the update and the continued partnership and the work that's being done by our SROs.
And Chief Deputy Walsh just confirmed that the DARE program will continue remotely, virtually, and we'll get that information to families soon.
Great.
Thank you. And the next item that I want to provide an update on is around transportation and where we are. We continue to experience significant delays throughout the district. At the last meeting, I know some board members have concerns in terms of Fox Run and Kendall's start time. So we convened a town hall for those school communities to solicit feedback from the parents and getting an understanding around what they would prefer to do in terms of the start time, and obviously with restrictions based on what we have flexibility around. I have Sandra speak to the final decision based on parental feedback and those conversations that took place.
Thank you, and thank you again for allowing me the opportunity to update the board and our families at home. So, like Dr. Estrella said, we are still experiencing student tardiness. We do keep a collection of arrival data, and we do it weekly. And for the last week, we were still at 60% of our buses arriving late. And this week we're at 59%. So it seems like it's leveled off at this 60%-ish mark. And that's what we had anticipated, which is why we had proposed the last time to you that we needed to make some changes. Another question that we've been getting is people sometimes saying that we're not fully occupying our buses. And we did pull some data on our ridership. So we are looking at a 69% ridership right now. That means that at any point, the average bus is about 69% full. One thing that we need to understand, and the public needs to understand, is that by Connecticut state statute, it's actually 10-281, we have to provide that seat and provide the option for the student to actually get on board if we are educating them. Now, the student could choose to walk to school, get dropped off at school, but we actually have to provide that seat. So we're operating at the capacity that we have to legally in terms of having these, the number of fleet that we have. But right now, you will see some buses that are at 69% ridership. A good litmus test is when we have early dismissal, you will see that all the buses are pretty much full because most people don't pick up their children during early dismissal. So you will see that we're actually operating at full capacity. And then on the 22nd, which was last week, we did put the Z passes in use, which help us track attendance and gather other data, like how long buses are taking to load children, unload children. So that'll also be useful data for us. So as we prepare for the new start times, we still have, and we're going to keep those additional daylight officers. Those are the 3 officers that are supporting our SROs in strategic areas to make sure that we have a smooth transition for the 5th. We've already worked with the NPD and along with DPW to support us on the 5th, which is when the new start times will begin. Trying to anticipate any projects that may cause delays and routing for those projects. We did have 2 town halls, one with the Fox Run community, one with the Kendall families, and this was the day after our board meeting, which was on the 15th. And then through those communications and through surveys that both of those school leaders sent home, we were able to settle on a time that worked for those communities at their request. We started communicating to families on the 16th about the start times, and we have been over communicating with families, really making sure that the schools are sending them reminders of the new start time and publishing them centrally also. And we continue to do practice runs. We've done several practice runs every Saturday since that decision was made. And on the 16th, we also did practice runs. We just did some this Saturday. And getting feedback actually from the drivers on which stock should go first, which stock should. So we actually got some good feedback this weekend that we'll be incorporating. And those routes have been published so that families have gotten a chance to look at them and ask us questions. And we are working with school administrations to revise their traffic patterns and additional signage where needed. So really approaching this from a holistic approach. These are the start times that were settled on, and you saw this during the last presentation. What you will see that wasn't spelled out in the last presentation are the Fox Run, because I remember Chairman, actually you have brought up the fact that Fox Run and Kendall would have been the most affected because it would have been like an hour shift. So you will see that Fox Run will now be at 8:15. 8:50. And then that Kendall will also be at 8:15. So both schools got to make that choice and we made it work for the routes so that we can actually meet the needs of those families. So those are the current times and those are the times that continue to be advertised. I think that's it for now in terms, any questions?
So regarding attendance taking, the middle and high school, being mindful of the kids who are riding the bus and, their attendance patterns being impacted by issues they can't control. How is that being addressed, or any preactive or preventative measures we're doing to ensure they don't feel the brunt of getting marked tardy and how that adds up in attendance?
And there were communications very early when we realized that the buses were running late to actually have the attendance of the students that were arriving on the bus be excused or have those tardiness be excused.
So in the sense of their attendance doesn't impact their grading, and anything different done to offer the learning that was lost, I don't know. I imagine it's going to be individualistic, but if there's anything general that we've been prepared to have made available for kids that are consistently missing big chunks of the first block.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what we have communicated to the schools is that we are sensitive to the fact that this is something that is an operational error that we needed to fix, and that we provide students with opportunities to make up that work the way we would for anybody that was sort of missing consistently something, either because of sports or because of the late arrival.
The last question I have, in terms of student bus riders, Any feedback we've solicited from them or just anything we've heard from them that was different or along the lines of what we know?
No, we have not, but we also have solicited a lot of feedback from families who I think typically children do go back and speak to their families about what is happening on the bus. The feedback that we knew was that the routes were really taking long, so we had students sitting in the bus for quite some time, and the families were very direct with us about the impact that that had on their children. But we haven't necessarily surveyed students about what their experience has been while riding the bus. It's a good suggestion.
It was more of a curious question. There was nothing behind it, just was curious if there.
But it's a good suggestion nonetheless.
Thank you for your answers.
Anything else?
Erica, I see your hand is up.
Okay.
Thank you. We've had some parents provide feedback that in sides of town where the elementary school and the middle school start times are aligned, and it would be difficult to get your elementary school and your middle school child into school at the same time if you were a driving parent. Can you share some of the feedback and how you've worked with principals to work that out?
So we're actually working on it centrally first. So what we did is we actually looked at parents right now that are impacted in that way. Those are the parents that may have children at like Marvin and Merrimack and Nathan Hale. So we looked at where parents have middle schoolers and elementary school students that are starting off at that same tier. And then we worked with our Before the Bell program to see what we could do for those families to be able to drop off their elementary school student earlier or their middle school student. So really working at it to see how is it that we could support them and having an alternate plan. So that's what we've been able to identify the families, and it actually, there were like 11 families. So one would think it would be like this huge amount of families, but there weren't. So we're actually able to work with them individually.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Erica. Any other questions or comments from board members? Okay, sounds like the work continues, and we
Yes,
appreciate
that continues.
we appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
The next item as part of the superintendent report is just providing the board an update that we have launched the work around the strategic plan. And we're moving forward with the goal set. Our goal is that by January, we will provide a mid-year review to the board, updating you where we are with the goals outlined for this year and the path forward. Obviously, from these initial goals, we continue to have the COVID goal that was never really articulated in our initial plans, but because we were anticipating being in a very different place than what we are right now. But that will continue to be a metric that we will continue to monitor and engage in as a result of the current realities that we are living. But I just wanted to make sure the board was updated in the fact that we are moving forward with the strategic plan, with the added caveat that COVID will continue to be an element of observation as we move forward with the work. With that in mind, as you know, our students engaged this past year in the Smarter Balance Assessment, and we were able to collect data in terms of where our students are and were in that moment in time based on that snapshot. There's a lot of information that will bridge our understanding and learning of where our students are at and what we did well as things that we will need to continue to monitor. One of the things that I will preface is what I said to our principals, and I said this to our assistant principals in CISD. This data will inform our work and our practice, but it doesn't define us. Because there are a lot of things that schools do that this assessment does not measure or provide metrics for. But is it a good tool to utilize to inform our practice and to highlight the things that have gone well despite the pandemic, and will inform the work ahead But again, I preface it doesn't define us because there are many elements of the tool that doesn't really measure the true scope of the work that schools do. So with that, I'm going to ask Ms. Diane Pilardo to please come forward. We have a presentation for the board that will provide you a deeper understanding of where we are as a district based on this particular metric. Some of the noticings and findings and comparisons to where we are relative to the rest of the state.
Good evening, Dr. Estrella and the Board of Education. Smarter Balance is given annually in the spring to students in grades 3 through 8 in English language arts and mathematics. Prior to 2021, the last administration was 2019. The 2020 state tests were waived due to COVID. Now, it's common to compare results at the school level, at the district level, and with the state. But this year, there's noticeable differences that we're going to talk about that impact our ability to make those comparisons. The big differences are students were remote to varying degrees. The second difference is that instruction was delivered using a variety of learning models. We had students that were in person, we had students that were in a hybrid learning model, and other students that were remote. Now, this report is going to focus, as the state did, on students that tested in school. In Norwalk, of all the students that tested, 92% of them tested in school, in comparison to statewide 88%. So we had approximately 4,500 students test in school. We had an additional 400 students that tested remote. So to add to the complexity, we have to understand this learning model classification. If you remember last year, the state collected attendance data from districts beginning in October right through the end of June. And what they did, they used this data to actually classify students. Students were in-person learners if they spent more than 75% of their school day in person. A hybrid learner was students that spent between 25% and 75% of their school days in person. And a remote learner spent less than 25% of their school days in person. So what did that mean? If you were a remote learner, you spent less than 3 months in school last year. If you were a hybrid learner, you spent between 3 and 7 months in school. So you have students whose delivery was very different. You had students who were sometimes were remote, sometimes in school. So this really adds to the complexity of analyzing this data. So we talked about a classification. This graph shows Norwalk's percent of students in each of the learning models, in person, hybrid, and remote, and compares the distribution to the state. If you notice, in both Norwalk and the state, the majority of students were hybrid learners. And what do we mean by that? They spent between 25 and 75% of their school days in person. The gray bar graphs represent the overall results. The blue bar graphs are the distribution by learning model for students with high needs. And the red bar graph represents the percent of students by learning model that did not have high needs. If you notice in Norwalk, there really is an even distribution, whether you were a high needs student or a student without high needs, between the in-person, hybrid, and remote. If you look at the state results, it was different. If you were a student who had high needs, you had a lower percent of students in person in comparison to the remote. You see high needs for the state. For in-person, were 21% of students, And for high needs, for the remote option, 31%. So we really in Norwalk had consistency, whether you were a high needs student or you did not have high needs, as far as how the learning model was distributed. Again, that classification based upon the percent of time you spent in school instruction.
The attendance, oh, sorry.
Sure.
The attendance data last year, is this had like 169 codes or something like that?
Yes,
So this information is reflective of attendance taken
absolutely.
from those codes.
Correct.
Okay.
And this was a special attendance collection that was done on a monthly basis. And the state really tried to put a light by classifying students the same way based upon the time that they spent in school, the percent of time.
I have more questions, but I want to be mindful if I should wait till the end or just let you.
I think with let's answer the questions related to attendance now, because then it'll get lost in translation with the other components. One thing I want to highlight, Godfrey, in terms of the attendance, that you could have had a child that was notated as being in person, but because of the number of days that the child transitioned into hybrid by the state definition would have appeared under the hybrid category, even though maybe 80% of the time they were in person. But because they were in that threshold of 20% or greater, they were classified as hybrid.
And situations where kids had to quarantine and be home for 10 days, are those reflected in how
Yes.
within the monthly data reported out for those students?
And we're going to look at that, the effect of quarantining on students in a bit.
And in light of the increased attendance codes, I imagine that change our policy around for how we execute taking attendance. So for example, at the high school, it's 3 times a day, I think, or something. Did that change at all when going to remote? And for elementary, I've always been used to once a day in the morning when we're in person. Did that change?
I think that your question is better answered by Ralph, who helped code those.
Yeah, so at the high schools, it's daily, it's a period by period of an attendance, that's how.
This data that we're looking at, was attendance taken the same way it was in person, or did that also change during remote? How often it
They
takes?
still have to take period by period attendance. And at the elementary school, it changed, where we actually had 2 times that they would take attendance, the beginning and the end of the day. So we can make sure that we were complying with the idea of the student being present for at least 50% of the day.
And the complexities is added on to analyzing. I wasn't clear around how the attendance and the other factors added up, where that adds to the complexity and what the complexity means.
It was based upon the counting of the attendance days. So this is just another way of looking at that data for a small group of students. These are the students who tested in school. And you see the distribution by the percent of students in person, hybrid, and remote. If you look, and it's by grade this time, so you see the variability, no surprise that in elementary school, the dominant learning model was in person. In middle school, the dominant learning model was hybrid. But if you look overall, you see about 1/3 of our students across grades 3 through 8 that tested were in person. 51% were hybrid and 17% remote. So what does that mean? 17% remote. These are students that had less than 25% of their days in school, but they came into school to test. And this truly is a credit to our teachers and our school leaders who encouraged families and students to come in, because testing in school is absolutely the best environment. Now, if you compare that to 11% for the state, we certainly did an outstanding job of reaching out to families and making them comfortable enough to have their students come into school to test. One last thing, we're talking about who and how many that causes this variability and difficulty really analyzing this data. But if you look even at grades 6, 7, and 8 in Norwalk, there's a big difference in the distribution. You see by 8th grade, a third of the students were remote testers in comparison to 20% in grades 6 and 7. Likewise, in-person learners, grades 6 and 7, about 9%. You look at grade 8, we're down to 3%. So even analyzing within the middle school by grade has implications because of the learning models of students. So this graph really illustrates the point that we're talking about, saying how this year, like everything else, it's very difficult to analyze results. So let's take a look at participation. Again, we're looking at the participation of students who tested in school. We see Norwalk in comparison to the state by the students' learning model. And overall, Norwalk's participation exceeded the state. But you see, if you compare in-person and hybrid, although we're higher, it's close. But when you look at remote, those students that spent less than 25% of their days in school had a much higher participation rate in Norwalk versus the state. Now we're going to take a look at proficiency results across grades by learning models. So by proficiency results, I mean this percent of students that were at their grade level standard or above their grade level standard on smarter balance testing. Those we refer to students that were at levels 3 and 4. There are 4 levels of reporting. So these were the students that met or exceeded the grade level standards. And we see proficiency in English language arts. Overall, 40.3% of our students were proficient. And in mathematics, 28% were proficient. But then you see the breakdown by the students' learning model. And again, this is across grades. Now, we're going to break this down further and look at results by grade, and again, by learning model. So we're looking at ELA. We see the grade bars at grades 3 through 8, and overall. Those grade bars are the proficiency percents from 2019. No, the learning model obviously was in person. Now we're comparing that to 2021 results. And we see again, red in-person percentages of proficiency, green hybrid, and the purple remote. When we look at this, we have to keep in mind in grades 3 through 5, 60% of our students were in-person learners, only 8% remote. Yet when you shift and you look at grades 6 through 8, 5% of those students were in-person learners and 69% hybrid, and the rest, 26%, were remote. So even though you're seeing overall that distribution we saw in the earlier graphs at 32, 51, and 17, when you break it down by grade, you see differences. Again, we're looking at 2 different groups of students. Students that tested in 2019 and students who tested in 2021.
I think the other thing that we have to preface is the fact that our middle school students that were in person last year were students that were high needs,
Yes.
either multilingual learners or SWDs. So that also creates variation in the data.
And in middle school, almost 60% of students that were in person were receiving special services, either multilingual learners or special education students. And unlike elementary school, where there was an even distribution by learning model, about 1/3 of students in every one of those buckets of learning were receiving special services. They were either MLL or special education students, very unlike the middle school. In middle school, remote students, only 20% of them were receiving services as MLL or special education students. So very huge difference in the landscape when you're looking at test results. Now, I think I skipped one. This is exactly the same distribution, but now we're looking at math. And you will see, even in subsequent graphs, that the impact, the loss in mathematics, if you're comparing 2019 to 2021, is larger. And that really is not just Norwalk or Connecticut. It was the national effect of students through this pandemic. So how does 2021 ELA proficiency compare to pre-pandemic levels? So we're comparing proficiency at grade level in Norwalk in the state. The blue points are the proficiency levels in 2019. The red points are the proficiency levels in 2021, and that's across the learning models. And the table below that, you see the loss. And this just gives you a visual, because we said that we really should be looking by learning model and not combining. But this has some value to really look at the overall impact. And it's clear that our younger students are the ones that, if you compare the third grader in 2019 and then the performance of the third grader in 2021, big difference. That's where you see the loss being higher, both in Norwalk and at the state level in the lower grades. Here's the same graph for mathematics. Now, we had an 8-point loss overall in ELA. Now we're seeing almost a 13-point loss in math. Again, this has been across the United States, that when we compare pre-pandemic to pandemic results, we see a huge decline in mathematics. And mainly, again, what's affected, not so much as ELA, but certainly you see bigger losses in the early grades. Now, this is just a picture of the demographic trends of our test takers, looking from 2017 through 2019 annually, the percent of students who tested in each of these demographics, and then 2021. The good news here, all of our students tested. You can see the percentages are in line. No surprise that if we go back to 2017, let's say, we see an 8 percentage point increase up to 55% in the number of our Hispanic test takers. We see a decline in Black students testing, in the district in white students testing. We see the percent of MLL students increasing slightly, likewise special education students. High needs is our largest category. 67% of our test takers were high needs students. Those are students that are either in special education or multilingual learners or are eligible for free and reduced lunch. Either one of those categories or more places a student in the high needs category. Now we're looking at the proficiency percent of our students by demographics, comparing ELA 2019 to 2021, math 2019 to 2021. If you look overall, you see proficiency in 2019, 48.2, down to 40.3%. That's about a 16% decline. In mathematics, the decline overall was about a 31% decline. Oh, just about double, The students that had the highest percentage decline were our multilingual learners and our special education students. Multilingual learners had a decline of 50% in between 2019 and 2021, and about 60% in math. So this is, you know, every group, every demographic group declined. But our students that need the most support declined during this pandemic. Now we have a question about quarantine. This graph shows ELA and math proficiency results by students. The non-means, those are a group of students that did not quarantine at all, and that was close to 70% of our students that tested. That was a little over 3,000 students. We had a third of our students who did quarantine, almost 1,300 were quarantined once or twice. And we had about 190 students that were quarantined 3 or more times. And for each of those categories in ELA and math, it's clear that we could really quantify the effect of quarantining on their achievement. Any questions? So what we haven't factored in yet, yes,
Do we trust the data?
yes, I do.
In terms of the quarantine?
Well, just in the sense of the intervention is driving and guiding, just, listening to some of the complexities and pulling and analyzing it, and also acknowledging the emotional state during the pandemic that isn't shown here. That was where the question came from,
There's been so many comments. What's the most important thing we can do for our children this year is give them emotional support. Because no doubt, there's no way to quantify the impact of the trauma that our children and our adults have had this year. And that's why, we're looking at this data and trying to inform instruction, have a starting point, but there's a lot that you can't measure. But we do know that we are seriously looking and embedding SEL support every day to our students' day.
And I think going back to your question in terms of the validity of the data, this data, it's only as good as of what you can compare yourself to. The challenge this year is that because every district had so much variability in terms of program model and design and approach, it's very hard for you to engage in an accurate comparison like we have in the past in terms of how we're doing relative to a cohort of districts that are similar to ours. I think the other challenge with this data, that it's just a moment in time, a snapshot of how students did in that particular day relative to all the other complexities that were going on that year. So it's good because it gives us a reference point of some of the work that we need to do. But obviously we've engaged in other school-based assessments to have a more accurate depiction of where our students are at and the work that we have to do this year to effectively support them in their growth and development.
Diane, I'm so sorry. Can I ask you to go back just 2 slides? I had one question on the,
Which one?
I think it was slide 12.
12.
So I know our high need students include students on free and reduced lunch, and we can see that percentage decreased from 2019 to 2021.
That's a very good point.
And so I'm curious, I'm sure that's in part related to the federal meals programs that gave free meals to students. And I wonder, do we know if somebody was in that category in 2019 and then not in that category in 2021, do we know if they ended up, do you know what other category they would be in?
That I don't know.
Okay.
But I do know that collecting the forms that were reported, every child was getting free lunch.
Yeah.
So that is really a flip. I mean, that is what was reported, the 56%. But if anything, it's probably 63 plus.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I just noticed that aberration. So yeah. Okay.
And that's really the reporting, and that's one of the limitations that we have.
Yeah.
Okay, So what's missing from all of this analysis is looking at students, match students prior to the pandemic, 2019, and compare their results during the pandemic, 2021. So again, we're looking at proficiency 2019 and 2021 for a subset of our students. It's students in grades 5 through 8, and only those students that had matching scores in grades 3 through 6 2 years ago in 2019. So overall in ELA, you see that 48% of these matched students, it was almost 2,700 students in grades 5 through 8, they were proficient in ELA. In 2021, 44%. But now what do you notice when you move over by learning model? You see that those students with matching scores, the students that were in person, that spent 75% or more of their school day in person, actually had a slight increase in terms of proficiency. They moved from 46% proficiency in their grade in 2019 up to 49% proficiency. Likewise, if you look at remote, that's where we had the largest loss or decline, both in ELA and even in mathematics. There was an 8-point decline in ELA from 51% to 43%, and then we see a 20-point decline from 44% down to 24%. So, you know, we talk about learning loss, but we need to recognize there was growth, and looking at matched gives you that opportunity. Growth not at the level that we're used to, or that is sufficient in order to close the gap, but clearly there were gains, small as they were still gains, and we should be celebrating that.
And I think it's really important to preface the fact that we are accustomed to looking at data based on cohorts that are not the same. We look at third grade from the prior year to third grade of the current year, and people don't realize that those are different students. You could have a third grade cohort that came in at a certain proficiency, and their growth metrics look very different than the third grade that might be present this year. So one of the things that Diane Pilardo and I have been having conversations, as well as the rest of the cabinet, is the importance of looking at data based on cohorts that are the same. And this is kind of an example of the work that we're hoping to do and continuously present to the board, looking at students based on where they were and keeping the same cohort to analyze the growth that they've acquired or lack thereof of the same subset of students versus looking at two different subsets of students and talking about how we did 1 year versus the other. Because we're in that process, we're comparing apples and oranges rather than apples to apples.
Dr. Estrella, when she saw this first graph, said, why don't you look at it by grade to see? So we're looking at grade 5 students who have scores in 2021 and as grade 3 students in 2019. And again, you see in-person learners fared well. There were about 403 fifth grade students who were in-person learners. And if you look 4 to 6, about even for in-person. Now, the grade 7 students, a very small group, about 30 students, and you can see that their 2019 proficiency was much lower than any other group on this chart, and yet they grew. For the most part, about 2/3 of those students was receiving special services, either as multilingual learners or special education students. So unpacking this data really puts a perspective on this.
And I noticed, Diane, too, that if you go back to grades 3 to 5 there in the ELA, the overall growth was up as well in 3 to 5.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, so worth noting.
Okay. For mathematics, the only place where we see an increase again is very needy students that were in person, 7th grade students, a small number, but yet they, in spite of the struggles overall with teaching mathematics in the environment we had last year, they went from 10% to 17%. But clearly you can see overall, there was a decline even with our matched students by grade.
And even in the cases that there was some level of decline, it was not as significant when you look at the overall perspective relative to the kind of year that we had, just to put things into context. But then again, like, this is the importance of looking at the same cohort of students over time versus looking at two cohorts that are not alike.
So we're back to ELA. One more disaggregation, and that is high need students versus students without high needs. Again, these are our matched students. And we see in both cases, whether you are a high need student or you do not qualify for high needs, being in person certainly increased your proficiency from 2019 to 2021. And remote learners are high needs. Remote learners in ELA dipped 7 percentage points, more than in hybrid. And in mathematics, our students dipped 9 percentage points, more than hybrid. So this data seems to tell that if you were with Norwell Public Schools and you had the opportunity to be in person, positive results. Again, I don't want to belabor this, but it's the same graph, again, broken down for high need students by grade. And again, you see grade 7 in person, you see grade 8 in person, an increase, and in grade 5. And for grade 6, it was about even. Non-high needs, we didn't have enough to actually report enough students. We had less than 6, but if you look at the grade 5 students that were in person, they fared well by being in person. If you compare their proficiency in 2019 and then again in 2021. For mathematics, there was a loss overall by learning model. But here, the largest loss for our high need students were those that were looking at results by grade again. For high needs mathematics, you see an increase in grade 7 students. When they were in 5th grade, they were at 8% proficiency. They grew to 13%. Grade 8 students, a very small group. The amount of in-person learners in grades 6, 7, and 8 that were matched were about 90 students. But you see how they fared. Non-high needs, we see declines. Now, a different way of looking at match data. We're looking at the results of 625 students. We were able to track their scores when they were in grade 3, 2016, all the way up to grade 8, 2021. Now, grade 7, 2020, we didn't have testing, but the state developed a mathematical model that we used in order to estimate the grade 7 Smarter Balance score. So what you're looking at now is not proficiency, you're looking at scale scores that range from 2100 to 2800, and those scale scores define the levels. Level 1, below standard, which is the red bar, part of the bar. Level 2, which is approaching standard. Level 3, which is the green, which is met standard. And the blue, level 4, is exceeding the standard. And you see, as the rigor of the standards grow, those bar graphs move up the scale. The dotted line represents Norwalk's average scale score by grade for those same students that are tested every year from 3rd grade all the way up to 8th grade. The line with the squares that are below that dotted line are our students with high needs. And the red line above the dotted line are our students without high needs. It's important to know there was growth, and we need to recognize, we hear a lot about learning loss, but we need to recognize there was growth, and this shows that growth. For example, if you look at our high needs population, the gain between grade 6 and grade 8 on that vertical scale is 21 points. So there was growth. Of course, the students are non-high needs had a little bit higher gain, 32 points, but nonetheless, there were gains. But what happened to the gap? The gap between our high needs students and our non-high needs students. In grade 6, that gap was 77 points on the vertical scale. By the time grade 8 rolled around, it was up to 88 points. So we're seeing growth, but it's not enough. Not enough to close the gap, not enough to maintain that gap. Now math, this is the same graph, the same group of children with math scores every year from 2016. What's happening to the gap here? In grade 3, the math gap was 61 points on the vertical scale. Grade 6, it grew to 87 points. Grade 8, 97 points on the vertical scale. So we see, even though there was growth, very small growth between 6 and 8, 1 point on the vertical scale for our high needs students, 11 points for our non-high needs students. Very, very little growth, but nonetheless, some. Okay. Now we're looking by race and ethnicity. And I can tell you the same scenario here. If you look at the gap between Hispanic students and white students, let's say in grade 6, on the vertical scale, the difference is 59 points. What happens by grade 8? It's up to 66 points. This is for ELA. Now looking at math, you see the gap between Black and white students in grade 6 was 77 points. In grade 3, it started out at 52 points, rose to 77 points, grade 8, 81 points on the vertical scale. So what do we see? We see growth, but we certainly do not see sufficient growth for any of our children, and particularly our students with high needs, because we have to accelerate their growth in order to close the gap. So what do we learn from this? We see the complexity of reporting these results because of learning models, students' location. We see that the impact on the pandemic on ELA was certainly different than in mathematics. And as I said before, this was a national event. I mean, this has been documented all over the United States. We certainly measured to some degree the impact of quarantining on our students. And we saw that the matched cohort analysis did see a decrease in the rate of student growth, but there was growth. But when you compare it to pre-pandemic, it was no surprise, it was much lower. And especially the growth for our high needs are Black and Hispanic students. But as Dr. Estrella said, this is just the beginning. This will just chart our path. This is just a baseline for where we continue forward. One last slide. This week, our families will be getting individual student result reports in the mail. Our principals and schools have been preparing this mailing. And the state of Connecticut, this will be going up on our website. The state of Connecticut has links for families, and the theme is working together, schools, families, and communities to keep our students safe, healthy, and in school. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Thank you so much, Diane, for that really rich presentation. Yes, I would like to open it up now for my colleagues. If anybody has any questions or observations, comments?
My question is, what are we hearing from teachers as they have the older students, and we've had that kind of the fallback and proficiency in both ELA, but pretty drastically in mathematics, and how all of this learning builds on itself, especially the learning in mathematics. What are we hearing from teachers about what they're doing to help catch kids up?
So this is the first time that we publicly present this data, and now the next step is for the principals, school leaders to have these conversations within their schools and decipher and have conversations about next steps. One of the things that I can tell you in terms of the district at large that we noticed across the system that we addressed early on around programming. And that is when mathematics was happening throughout the district. One of the trends that we noticed is that a lot of times mathematics was being scheduled at the end of the day, and that there was no diversity in programming, allowing opportunities for mathematics to happen in a rotating schedule with literacy. So we've worked with school leaders to really kind of remap what the school day looks like by diversifying the program and providing opportunities and variations to allow mathematics to happen during the school day. Actually setting expectations around mathematics blocks as well as literacy blocks. There is a tendency because most of the time, especially in elementary schools, we don't have people that are content experts, particularly in mathematics. So we see sometimes a shying away from teaching that content more and focusing more on the literacy in those content areas. So we've engaged in a concerted effort to, one, provide the programming structure to ensure that mathematics is happening on the daily basis and that people stay in routine, because I think part of it was the amount of time being designated for mathematics throughout the district. Particularly in the elementary grades. And then in the middle schools, it had a lot to do with when it was being programmed and making sure that students were having opportunities throughout different components of the day to experience mathematics and not like set in stone across a particular block of time. We've also have coaches that are within all of our schools providing support to our staff in the area of mathematics, as well as professional development, because we are infusing a new curricula, illustrative math across the district. And I know it's a high lift for the staff, given everything else that they have to engage in, to now work towards learning some of these new practices and routines. Yet in the end, this will yield better outcomes because it will force students to engage in deeper mathematical thinking and problem-based real-world application of mathematics that will help them decipher some of the complex problems that I'm pretty sure are incorporated in the Smarter Balance assessment and will help them not only thrive in that particular point in time, but also throughout their mathematical career and their experiences.
Thank you.
Dan, I really appreciate it, and Dr. Estrella, having the matched cohort data. I think it allowed us to see some level of narrative as over the years. Does that matched cohort data exists at the state level, or is that something that would have to
And
be?
that's something that we did in-house.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, great. Well, at the very least, I do appreciate what Dr. Estrella said about this data being used as a way to inform our future work, but not being used as a way to label any child, given the extreme circumstances everybody was learning in this past year. I don't think I could do it, and I want to applaud. There was definitely some room for appreciation in some of those numbers, that we saw some growth. And I want to applaud every single student for, hanging in there, and we'll get through this together. Okay. Thank you so much.
And in closing, I just want to congratulate the Tracy Elementary School community for winning one of the challenges, the Norwalk Says No to Plastic first annual Clean Water Campaign Contest, as well as Nathan Hale Middle School. We have the principal of Tracy Elementary here. I don't know if she wants to say a quick few words. They won a $500 award this Saturday at the boat show. And Nathan Hale also had the privilege of also participating and winning as the middle school award.
Keeping the print alive.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Estrella and Chairman Hostin, our DOE members, Dr. Estrella and members of the cabinet. I'm Brenda Brush. I'm the proud principal of Tracy Magnet. And as you know, we're a national school of character, where we live by our 5 core values of print, problem solving, respect, integrity, being neighborly, and taking responsibility. Our Cubs certainly left their prints on the Norwalk Boat Show this past Saturday. They were invited to take part in the Norwalk Says No to Plastic display and contest there. And they took home the first place elementary prize, and the $500 will be used to continue their work in helping our city learn about how to reduce our plastic footprint here in the city and also the effects on the world. I want to recognize the students who did take part in this project: Annabelle Geideman, Natalia Torres, Hisham Bahora, Nasif Khan, Michaela Urfe, Christina Antoine, Christian Roden, Serenity Williams, Giancarlo Cadena, Liv Azima, Snyder Maya, I'm sorry, it's incorrect there, and Scarlett Musja, and as well as our character theme education coach, Christian Penta, and our STEM coach, Johnson Serbo, who works very hard with those students. So congratulations to them. And Dr. Estrella, thank you to you for coming and seeing them. They were very happy to have you there. Thank you very much. And there's a little video of them explaining their project to you.
Evening, Dr. Estrella, Mayor Relling, and board members. Thank you for this chance to share our project, Tracy Cubs Say No to Plastics, that we completed for the Norwalk Boat Show. We are so excited that we were able to bring back a first place prize to our school. We also want to congratulate Nathan Hale Middle School for taking home first place in their division. Let's keep changing the world, NPS. We started our project with just 12 fifth graders to research and divine and investigate the impact that micro and macroplastics have on our environment, especially our oceans. We found that macroplastics break down, they end up in our water supply, oceans, and our food chain. We even went a step further to learn about nanoplastics, which are plastics that are so small you cannot see them.
As a team, we didn't want to educate Norwalk about microplastics and that these are the plastics that can be the most dangerous. We wanted people to see that plastic water bottles, bottle caps, plastic bags, takeout containers, and other plastic items are just the start of the problem. So we decided to build a giant microscope that would be the representatives of those plastics you cannot see.
We made the microscope out of bottle caps, a challenge that our school has been part of for the last 3 years with Sound Waters. Our school has collected over 180,000 caps. Our goal this year is to get to 200,000. We used bottle caps as a way to represent all of the different types of plastic that make it into our waterways.
Our next steps with the entire 5th grade class at Tracy is to launch our service learning project. This will connect us to community partners to come up with small and large scale solutions that limit macro and microplastics in our oceans. As we continue this journey, we have science class and print to use as we examine ways to take responsibility for our plastic footprint in ocean habitats. Tracy Cubs are always excited to work with our partners to problem solve and persevere towards solutions that educate, advocate, and make a difference for all of Norwalk.
So congratulations to the schools and the staff that supported them in the process. I had a great time on Saturday, despite being stuck in traffic. I also wanted to take a moment to thank the Marine Science Academy at Brian McMahon High School, who exposed me to all kinds of crabs and marine life. They had me grabbing and having little crabs crawling in my hand. I had the best of time, and I was well educated by the students. So thank you to the teachers and all the staff that have helped make this possible for our children. It was a great Saturday for me, just celebrating with our scholars the great work that they've accomplished thanks to our staff. And that concludes the superintendent report.
Thank you, Dr. Stray, and to all the staff members who helped present data to us tonight. Before we move forward, I do want to acknowledge and thank Lisa Brinton in particular for her remarks tonight and for her request and suggestion that the Board of Education and Norwalk Public Schools remember the legacy of Mike Barbas in some way. And I want to say that that's something I think that we all are committed to doing. And one of the things that we will be looking into what options there are in concert with feedback from the community, his constituents, his friends, his family, and we would like to sort of honor his memory as best we can. And I do want to add my personal appreciation for Lisa, who has been a strong advocate for our schools in her own right. So moving on to the next item on the agenda, we have the consent calendar. Consent calendar allows us to approve 4 items with 1 vote: the approval of personnel. I see Sherelle's hand. Sherelle, sorry. Did you want to say something? Okay. We have the approval of personnel, approval of budget transfers, approval of trips, and the approval of minutes. As a reminder, any board member can ask for any of these items to be removed from the consent calendar for separate discussion. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar? Thank you, Diana. Is there a second? And thank you, Godfrey. Is there any discussion on the consent calendar? Seeing none, all in favor of approving the consent calendar, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Thank you, and I see Sherelle's hand. Thank you. Moving on to item number 4, we have the recognition of Hispanic Heritage Month. And we do have a statement regarding that, which I'm going to read unless Diana want to read it. Do you want to? Unfortunately, it's in English.
It's okay. I read English, no. The Norwalk Board of Education is proud to recognize September 15th to October 15th, 2021 as Hispanic Heritage Month. During Hispanic Heritage Month, we recognize the contributions made and the important presence and impact of Hispanic and Latino Americans in our community and nation. Through strong commitment to family, faith, and hard work, Latinos have enhanced and shaped our national character with centuries-old traditions that reflect the multi-ethnic and multicultural customs of their community. Hispanic Heritage Month celebrates the histories, cultures, and contributions of American citizens whose ancestors came from Puerto Rico, Mexico, the Caribbean, Central and South America, or other Spanish cultures. The roots of Hispanic Heritage Month go back to 1968. Each year on September 15th, the anniversary of independence of 5 Latin American countries is recognized. Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, Mexico, Chile, and Belize also celebrate their independence days during this period. The observation started in 1968 under President Lyndon Johnson as Hispanic Heritage Week and was expanded by President Ronald Reagan in 1988 to cover a 30-day period. The Hispanic population of the United States now totals more than 60.5 million people, making people of Hispanic origin the nation's largest ethnic and racial minority. As of July 2019, Hispanics constituted 18.5% of the nation's total population. In Norwalk, Spanish language and culture are an integral part of family life with over 4,300 students who speak Spanish as primary language. By declaring this Hispanic Heritage Month, the Board of Education encourages all schools to bring an appreciation and understanding of others' cultures and languages into the lives of our young children, and share in this annual tribute by celebrating the generations of Hispanic Americans who have positively influenced our city and country.
Thank you, Diana. What I meant is that it should also be in Spanish. Just to make it official, all in favor of declaring Hispanic Heritage Month, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Thank you. And thank you. Next, we have the final year-end fiscal year 2020 to 2021 budget transfers, which our CFO, Tom Hamilton, can give us a little bit of background on.
Good evening, board members. This is the annual presentation of the closeout transfers. You'll recall from the June board meeting, the board authorized in June for the superintendent to approve these transfers so we could close out the fiscal year on a timely basis. And so we presented to the Finance Committee and we present to you tonight those list of final transfers. I'm not going to go through them page by page. It's 11 pages long. This is the full list of all transfers, not just the transfers above 10,000. So this is really just cleanup, end of year cleanup, so we can close the books.
Thank you, Tom. And just for added context, this was presented to us in the Finance Committee, and a lot of the cleanup was related to supply chain delays for things that had not been delivered by the end of the fiscal year. Is that correct?
Correct. Well, that really is the item D on your agenda, which is the carryover balance and the year-end close, item C. But you are correct that a number of the transfers were related to items that are on the carryover list as well. So that would be primarily curriculum materials, as well as some other purchases made by the schools in the month of June that had not been received at the point the city was closing the books first week of August.
Thanks for that clarification. Are there any questions about these year-end transfers? Is there a motion to approve these year-end transfers? Thank you, Diana. Seconded. Thank you, Suzanne. All in favor of approving these year-end transfers, please say aye or raise your hand. Thank you. I got Sherelle.
I also, sorry.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Tom. Next, we have the approval of the 2020 to 2021 year-end fiscal close. This is what I was getting ahead of myself.
Right, okay, so that is a, I guess it's about a 4-page or 5-page document that's in your package that shows the original budget by line item, the revised budget by line item, the final expenditures as of the close of the fiscal year, and then the remaining balance. And so what the report shows on the last page is that of the revised budget of $208.5 million, we had expended 204.4 million, leaving an amount that was nominally available at the end of June of 4,047,000. And then the reconciliation on the bottom shows that there were final carryover purchase orders, and we've given you an itemized list of all of those purchase orders that totaled 3,559,000. Those are the items that were ordered typically in the month of June, although there were some items that were actually ordered several months before that, particularly in the technology area, where because of the worldwide chip shortage, there's been some delays in receiving some technology related items as well. But in any event, we have carryover purchase orders. And again, the biggest piece of that is curriculum materials and curriculum materials of about $2.5 million. There's also a reservation of funds for unsettled labor contracts and deferred retirement payouts of $60,000, and that leaves a final free balance of $326,909, and that's the final free balance, if you will, that's available, and which is the subject of the next item on your agenda. If you want me to just talk about that one, I could, because they go sort of hand in hand.
Yeah, that would be great.
And so the last item under finance on your agenda is item D, which is to approve a request to the city to carry over the unexpended balance from fiscal year 2021 and to place those funds into a non-lapsing fund pursuant to Connecticut General Statute 10-248A. We've included in there a letter which, if authorized by the board, will then be sent to the city requesting the Board of Estimate and Taxation approve the carryover of the $326,909 to be placed into the non-lapsing fund of the Board of Education. And I think that pretty well describes it, but happy to answer any questions on either item C or D.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom. Open it up to my colleagues. Anybody have any questions about either of these items? I think it's pretty straightforward, Tom. That magic number is at 326,909.16%. That's pretty close budgeting, and we appreciate everything that you and your office has done to get us to this point. If there are no more questions, if everybody's okay, we can move these together. If I have a motion to approve both the year-end fiscal close and the request to carry over the unexpended balance from the previous fiscal year together. Thank you, Suzanne. Seconded by Diana. Thank you. All in favor of approving these two items, please say aye or raise your hand. Excellent.
Aye.
Excellent, thank you. And I also see Sherelle, just to make sure that get the minutes together. And finally, we have, and thank you, Tom. Finally, we have item E, the approval to close out Silvermine Elementary School, asbestos flooring removal and replacement. Long time coming. I don't know if there's anything we need to know in contextually for this. I think it was presented at facilities meeting. This is a fairly procedural vote so that we can, in part, so that we can apply for reimbursement. The work has been done. We just need to approve it. If there's a motion. Diana, thank you. Seconded by Sherelle. Yeah. If there's no other discussion about this, I'll call for a vote. All in favor of approving the closeout of Silvermine Elementary asbestos floor removal, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Excellent, and thank you. I see you, Sherelle. Okay, that takes us to section 5, information and reports. We do have the monthly plans. Don't go far, Tom.
Okay, you have the August financial report. Obviously, it's still very early in the fiscal year. We're 2 months through the fiscal year, but 0 months through the school year at the end of August. So you can't really glean too much from the report at this stage. But in any event, we've expended, as of the end of August, $10.1 million, or just under 5% of the district operating budget. It's in line with the expenditures from last year at this same point in time. As I said, there's really not a whole lot to glean from this. The wage accounts are running as we would expect at this point. Fringe benefits get posted after the first quarter, so you don't see any significant fringe benefit expense because the health benefits haven't been posted. The only area where we do tend to have some really significant expenses is in some of the facilities areas where the facilities department takes advantage of the summer months when schools are not as occupied as they are during the school year to get some work done. So for instance, in the 430 account, which is repairs and maintenance services, we're 40% expended of the budget at this time of the year, or at this point in the year. But again, I don't think that's anything particularly unusual. There's really nothing, extraordinary to report. So unless there's any questions, I'll leave it at that.
We'll take nothing extraordinary to report. Thanks again, Tom. That takes us to committee representative reports. I invite any board members, if there's something going on in committee that we did not talk about tonight that you want to give us a heads up on, please feel free to share. Going once, twice. Okay, I think a lot of the committee work, as Tom suggested, similar to our finance reporting, is just really getting started for the school year. So we'll hear more as time goes on. If any board members have any personal or professional announcements, I also invite them to make them at this time. And I just want to say what I think is clear to most people, that I think most of us are still in a state of shock from last week's news. And that's it. It's been a very tough week. So I think that's probably a good place to end it. If there's a motion for adjournment, Diana, I'll second it. All in favor of adjourning at 8:57, all in favor, say aye, raise your hand.
Aye.
And that will adjourn our meeting for tonight. Thank you so much, everybody, for your participation. Have a good rest of the night.